Welcome to the 2021 MASNA Award presentation. Starting in 2017, MASNA recognizes two individuals for the work in the marine aquarium hobby that positively contributes to the ongoing sustainability of the hobby and future marine environments through the MASNA Award and the Aquarist of the Year Award. Together with MASNA, previous winners of the MASNA Award and Aquarist of the Year Award evaluate a pool of MASNA membership nominated individuals to decide who has given the most to the hobby and industry over their lifetime and past year, respectively. The MASNA Award is historically what was called the Aquarist of the Year Award. The MASNA Award is to recognize those individuals who have contributed a lifetime of achievement to the marine aquarium industry, not only recently, but in the past. MASNA is proud to honor Svein Fosså of Norway as the 2021 MASNA Award recipient for his foundational publications, his lifetime involvement in promoting the marine aquarium hobby, and his tireless scientific and logical defense of the aquarium hobby and trade on the global stage through his work with Ornamental Fish International and CITES. What follows is a short surprise call with Svein and Matt Peterson when we announced that he was the recipient, and then a panel discussion with Svein, Shane Willis of OFI, Julian Sprung of Two Little Fishies, Alf Jakob Nielsen, Sven's co-author and 2020 MASNA Award recipient, Marshall Myers, Matt Peterson, and myself. To learn more about Svein, you can go to masna.org, hover over MASNA programs, and click on the MASNA Award.
So as I was saying, we had some questions, and really the most important one is that we need your address because we have to send you one of these.
Oh.
So I want to say congratulations on behalf of everyone that you've been selected as the 2021 MASNA Award winner.
Thank you very much.
So congratulations. We just wanted to surprise you a little bit.
Okay.
As some of the MASNA Award committee members said, the Scandinavian sweep is now complete. with Alf Jakob being the MASNA Award recipient in 2020, and now Svein Fosså being the recipient in 2021. And being a Scandinavian myself, I can't think of any better reason than to say, hey, keep the door open in case I need to come back. And all joking aside and all seriousness aside, every year this committee grows by one. And on rare occasions, we happen to lose one. But the award process is driven by nominations from MASNA members. And if someone's not nominated, we can't consider them. It's that simple. So every year we get a good number of nominees, and it was a very close decision, as it often is. And through some deliberation and a couple rounds of votes, the MASNA Award Committee has selected Svein as the MASNA Award winner for 2021. So on behalf of the entire committee, I would like to say congratulations and welcome everyone to this celebration of Svein's award.
Well, thank you, Svein, for the cooperation over many years with books and stuff. And I remember when I first met Svein, like I mentioned in the beginning of this meeting, he was really the guy that opened my eyes for switching from a sterile aquarium type to a more biological type of aquariums, and it really helped me see the right way to go with aquariums. That was one thing, and the other thing was Svein is a very good writer, and he's always been very interested in books. And he has been over the years, and when we have worked with the books, he's very good in digging out literature that was relevant to our work. And he's also been very good he's very interested in biological nomenclature, also how to write correct names on animals and organisms. That's some small details that are all in all meant a lot of for the final result of our books.
Absolutely.
So you should continue with that as well. And I think he collects a lot of books. You know, don't you, Svein?
At the last count, I had around 4,500 volumes on aquarium-related topics.
Yeah. And you read them all.
Well, not all, but most, at least parts of them.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very appropriate background there behind you. And I had the same thought that, you know, look, the both of you in the series, many series of books that you created had a very, very powerful impact on the level of expertise of the aquarium hobby worldwide. As you know, of course, I, am one half of a duo who have created much fewer books, but a similar impactful series of books in reef aquarium keeping here in the US, and to some extent a little global trade. But Svein, your work that Alf specifically talked about, the level of detail in seeking reference material, in correctly identifying organisms and biological processes, certainly influenced the work that Charles Delbick and I did. I mean, we were working on similar topics at the same time, and we corresponded a lot. And so it helped to raise the boats, raise the sea level everywhere, so that people had a degree of expertise that would, just was not happening otherwise. So you were very, very influential in sharing your love of this literature and interest in the detail of getting things right. So we learned a lot from you, and I think you might have picked up a couple of things from us as well, because likewise, I collect books and enjoy getting things right and learning about new ideas. So it's been a great collaboration, but you have done so much, and it's wonderful now to see you getting this award and recognition for that at this time.
Thank you. And may I add that my collaboration with you two, Alf Jakob, and to a somewhat lesser extent, but not less important, with Julian, has been very interesting, very fruitful, and full of joy. And you realize, Julian, that also in CITES context that we are covering in today's talks, I have come to you when I have needed help on things where my knowledge didn't suffice also. So I will certainly hope to be able to continue to ask you for help when things are getting too complicated.
Yeah.
And it was also a pleasure that the last trip abroad that I succeeded in having before the pandemic went to Florida, where I also met you. I was disappointed that I didn't get your famous mangoes, but I didn't tell you in advance that I was coming, so that was perhaps the reason.
There will be future opportunities.
Yeah, I hope so.
By
the way, I will bring attention to my coffee mug.
Yes. Oh, what year is that? Is that 1991? No, 1994.
MACNA. Wow.
I can't remember which year it was, but it was in Cleveland. It's pretty washed out by now, but I thought I should use it today anyway.
What do you use it for? What do you use it for? Beer or coffee?
Actually, water at the moment.
Reminds me.
That's great.
Yeah,
that was MACNA 6. Off the top of my head, that was 1994. Yeah, Richard Pyle was the keynote that year.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Good memory.
I got it right here in front of me.
I had a nice dinner together with Richard and Julian and some others, where Richard mentioned or uttered these famous words that in the freshwater hobby, when people get excited of finding a new species, they say, wow, and it's even grayer than the previous one.
Yeah.
I have to go to
I would like to congratulate Svein, and I will start out with showing a magazine here. I don't know if you can see it here.
There we go. Yeah.
Yep.
It's from February 1981.
Wow.
We were students in Bergen, and Svein and I started to write in this Swedish magazine that was the major aquarium magazine in Scandinavia and at that time. But Svein, he has always been very interested in history of aquarium. So what he wrote about, what he did write, was fish in the old Egypt, and he showed photos of since long dead fishes that was from the 1400th century. And there's one here. It's a mummified fish. And of course there were some reactions in the next issue of the magazine that they would not have the editor publishing pictures and stories of since long dead fish that have smelled for a very long time. But it resulted in that we opened our eyes for history for aquarium, and Svein has written the chapter in our latest book on the history of aquarium keeping, and I feel that Svein is now as much into history and administration of aquarium keeping than in practical aquarium keeping. Is that correct, Svein? Do you remember this story from this magazine?
I remember very well. As the connection between modern aquarium keeping and what was going on in ancient Egypt was quite fascinating. I spent a lot of time discussing with professors in Egyptology at the time and learned quite a lot of what deep connections Egyptians felt to fish, even kept them in garden ponds. So it was part of what started me on sidestepping from aquarium keeping alone. And you are totally right that nowadays I'm much more into the politics of aquarium keeping and trade in aquarium organisms than anything else. I must admit, it's been some years since I had an aquarium, and that is in part connected to the fact that before the pandemic, I was traveling far too much to actually being able to have any live animals at home.
Okay,
I think I've seen a photo of you maybe in your teens reaching into an aquarium. It must have been a slide of yours in the past with all your membership cards on the right. Is that keeping aquaria even before your teens?
Oh, my first aquarium was a gift from my parents when I was probably 8 years old. And before that, my father kept an aquarium. So it came in at a very early age, this fascination for whatever lives underneath the water surface. But it really took off when I got in my teens. And I think at some stage before I moved out to start my university studies, there were aquariums in every room of the house where my mother didn't protest too much. So there were aquariums in my room, of course, in the basement, in the loft. I even had some in an outhouse that we had in the garden. And I had 2 ponds at the same time in the garden. So I was pretty fishy already then.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, Svein, that one of the first marine tanks you had that was decorated with solid calcareous rock that were obtained from locally in Norway, and it grew with Babesia filamentous algae. And what you experienced, and I think also wrote about, was that the fish that normally get a lot of diseases in the traditional marine tanks at that time, which were decorated with dead skeletons and sterile environment, they didn't catch any sickness in that algae tank. And that was a part of what led to our discussion and later on to book writing. And why was this happening?
Oh, yeah. I was very early in my marine aquarium keeping. I was quite fascinated by the Indonesian Lee Eng, who coined the term the natural system, and wrote some articles for Tropical Fish Hobbyist magazine as well as a book. Well, he didn't write the book, but a friend of him, a Dr. Risley, I think his name was, wrote on behalf of Lee Eng about the natural system. And I started corresponding with him when I was probably 17 years old or so, and we were in contact all the way up till I got, after having not heard from him for half a year, I got the message that he had died at a fairly early age.
Yeah, we referred to that book in our books a lot, several times, I think. Yeah. Well, my relation to Svein is many years back. We met when I was in teaching academy in Stavanger. I think, when was it, Svein? In 78?
I think it may have been already in 77.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe earlier, maybe 77. And since then we have been friends and traveled a lot and had a lot of red wine and wrote a lot of books. So,
Yeah. All blurs.
So, yeah, what more is there to say? I mean, we have been cooperating with books since, well, the first book came in 1980.
89, I think.
No, I can check. Hold on.
Yeah.
I have it here. It's
Swedish.
small
What's
Swedish.
hold it up there just a little bit longer, Alf.
Yeah. Hold on. I just find it the
Aquarium.
year. 88. 88.
Yeah.
That was in Sweden, and it was a series of 1, 2, 3, 4 books. And since then, it just kept on rolling. So we have more or less cooperated with books until the last one came in 2016.
That's quite the history you two have together. Julian,
Yes.
welcome this morning.
Thank you.
Julian's from, yes, of Two Little Fishies.
Yes. Hi. Great to be here, and it's an honor to honor you, Svein. We go back not quite as far as you do with Alf. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think I met you by way of Alf. I think I contacted Alf Jacob first. Is that right, Alf?
You called me. I've written an article on how Germany grew corals out of live rock.
That's right.
And then you called me, and 3 days later I met you on the airport. You wanted to come over and see what was happening. And
That's it.
I think you met Svein in that connection.
And that at that time, yeah. And then that kind of started. Reef hobbyists have this tour of tanks thing that they do. That we, three of us, coined that, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, back at that time, that would have been right about 1990, I guess.
The beginning of the 90s.
Yeah. Okay, 90 or 91, I don't know. But in any case, there was no internet. We had fax machines, and they used the rolls of fax paper. And that was our instant messaging at the time. And so, yeah, Charles Delbick and I were really curious about the growing of the SPS corals that was happening in Germany. Of course, there was already a reef aquarium hobby in the USA, but mainly we were keeping soft corals, leather corals, a few LPS, large polyp stony corals. But, the challenge of keeping Acropora and other SPS was kind of a dream, but it wasn't quite happening yet, but almost. And rumors, there was discussion. And so it was fascinating corresponding with the both of you, and then traveling, doing basically tour of tanks. We got together. We were in Alf Jacob's Volvo, right? Yeah. And Svein was the map reader, giving directions. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have our phones. We had maps, and we took a tour, through Denmark, through Germany, and many places on ferries, and met a lot of interesting hobbyists and took a lot of pictures. And this kind of scene has been repeated all over the world among avid reef aquarium hobbyists. It's great to do a tour of tanks. You always meet interesting people and see wonderful things. And the trip along the way is great for conversation. And then the evenings afterwards, good food and good drinks. So that was my introduction with Svein to do that. And then, of course, various aquarium conferences and different situations, interacting, looking at coming regulations and what might affect the aquarium hobby that Svein has been so deeply involved with.
I think that dovetails perfectly into our next two guests who have joined us. Shane, how about you kind of take in, introduce yourself and your background and how you met Svein?
Yep. Yeah, well, my name's Shane Willis. I'm currently the president of Ornamental Fish International. And I guess that's sort of how I've met Svein. I become involved with OFI around 2006. I'm not quite sure when I first started talking to Svein, but I knew of him and I'd read a couple of his books. And it was quite, well, he's someone I had admired because of the books I'd read and everything. So it was probably around 2008. I think we started talking at one of the trade shows, and obviously he's currently the vice president of OFI. We talk regularly. We're always, I suppose, commiserating about some of the things that are going on in the industry. Currently, a lot of issues, and certainly, Svein. A lot of people wouldn't realise, the work that he's done within CITES, particularly. He's been a huge advocate for our industry, and if it wasn't for him, I think our industry would look a lot different. The trading corals, things like Banggai cardinals, etc., would be very, very different to what they are now. And certainly, it's not just marines; it's also freshwater, with stingrays and other species as well. So we talk regularly. I enjoy his. Well, I'm going to say wisdom. You're not that much older than me, Svein, but we have some very good discussions about things. And probably one of the things I do enjoy too, when we do get together at trade shows and that, Svein is very much a food and wine connoisseur, and it's quite enjoyable to have a nice meal and wine with Svein after a hard day. So, and look, in terms of the award, I couldn't think of a better person. Certainly the work that he does in the background that people don't see, it's just enormous. So thanks, Svein, for all the hard work that you do for OFI on behalf of the rest of the industry. So congratulations, mate. You've well deserved.
Thank you. And thank you to you and OFI for still keeping me busy, as it's strange working in this field that the more difficult issues I'm faced with, the more interesting it is to actually get involved. So I wouldn't have been much without OFI, and I think I got involved with OFI first in the mid-90s when John Dawes, who was Secretary General at that time, asked me to get involved. And it didn't take very many years before I became president, which I lasted 4 years. I felt probably that the politics within the organization wasn't halfway as interesting as the politics towards our loyal opposition, all the animal rights groups that want to close us down. So I enjoy kind of being a little bit in the background, as Shane indicates.
Well, you do a very good job at it, mate. And then, yeah, again, look, it's great to have someone else that you can bounce ideas off, discuss some of these issues, because it's, I guess the industry is facing a lot of pretty complex issues. We often talk about the fact that as trade associations, so not just OFI, but we do work closely with OATA, PIJAC, etc. So we're trying to coordinate our efforts, but unfortunately, the animal rights groups that are targeting the industry are very well funded, very well coordinated, and we need to be on our best game. So there's a lot of things we need to consider. And Sven, thanks for all your help with that. And please don't go anywhere.
Well, and Mr. Myers, Marshall Myers, thank you for being with us today.
I'm an attorney that is older than Sven. I was a little scared when I heard about this award that this was going to be the announcement of his deciding to retire. Congratulations, Sven. I first met him in the early 90s, I believe at Interzoo. And then we went on to do a number of projects together, whereas today, many years later, I'm now his Sherpa. I carry his bags at CITES meetings. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with OFI and Sven in recent years since I departed the U.S. pet industry, left it to Julian to master. But Sven has always been not only incredibly collaborative, insightful. Thank God he's a gourmet, because I've had some of those fabulous meals in the world with him in a variety of countries, even to the point where I believe we were in Thailand when he knew the chef from London who was now at that restaurant. So he may know a lot about fish. He knows a hell of a lot about good food. But he has been a true friend. It's been a wonderful, I guess, close to 30 years or more that we've worked together, and look forward to continuing to do it till I drop. So Sven, congratulations, well-deserved, and there should be a lot more coming, and we hope you keep working hard and enjoying your cabin in the mountains.
Thank you, Marshall. And I think you can rest assured that even how much I appreciate this award, I do not for 1 second take it as a suggestion that I should step down and retire.
I think
I'm inspired before by you in the sense that as long as there is life, there is reason to struggle.
You're giving away my age.
Oh, no, I haven't.
I just wanted to say, I think Julian can speak to this a little bit, Alf can, and we mentioned it, it's this award, at least to me, is also a mandate to keep doing what you're doing. It is a job well done, and keep doing it. We all value what you put into the hobby and the industry, and it's definitely not a suggestion to retire, not at all. I will say that for everyone.
Absolutely.
Matt, you haven't given Svein the list of time commitments he now has to take on.
It's pretty substantial, but we all do it. It's a labor of love. So
you don't get to keep the award. Just you have to keep working at it.
And I have a question. Has anyone in the industry ever been an officer of as many associations as Sven?
I wouldn't think so.
I think so, no.
That's
Yeah.
why I had to clarify the list earlier. I was like, OFI, EPO, Norwegian Pet Trade, and things in the past. Is there anything else currently?
What can come is the main question.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, right.
IPAC.
Well, IPAC in a sense, but IPAC, for those of you who don't know, it is an informal platform for collaboration between trade associations in the pet industry that was started by Marshall actually in 1995. But that far back, there were very few people even in trade associations who really saw the challenges that were ahead of us. So getting people to be actively involved in the 90s was not easy. I think the time is ripe now, overripe, so to say. So I've been, with the permission of Marshall, trying to revitalize this International Pet Advisory Council, and have received promising feedback from trade associations all over the world so far. And we're launching the first meeting mid-September, but I have absolutely no intention of being a figurehead for that organization. I think if it is going to work, it has to work because every individual member of the group actually does a job in it.
Yep.
And the advantage that we have today, Sven, in 95, we met every 2 years at Interzoo, and the gaps were too great.
Yep.
Today, with the internet and video conferencing, all sorts of ways of transferring documents, I think it's a golden opportunity for those in the industry to really increase their knowledge and awareness of all these issues. And don't shy from the fact COVID-19 and the pandemic issues are creating a whole new avenue of areas where we're seeing regulations popping up in different countries, especially in the US, really start putting restrictions on which species are safe.
Oh, yeah.
So
Yep.
it's going to be a tough few years.
Yeah, it's being used by the anti-pets and fish keeping communities for everything it's worth all over the world, not only the US.
Right.
Canada is in big trouble now with the animal rights groups trying to ban most pets in some areas of Canada, Winnipeg foremost, where there is proposals for a total ban on all wild caught fish, positive lists on practically every other pet, including such a short list of reptiles that it would scare anyone who was interested in that hobby. In Belgium, there are proposals to ban all wild-caught fishes. OFI, together with EPO, OATA, and DBEVO, sent in a hopefully very good and at least extremely voluminous response to the Belgian authorities on that yesterday. So we are trying to follow whatever happens. I had a talk with PJAC Canada earlier today on the Winnipeg issues, but we have far too small and limited resources, both economically and in manpower, compared to everyone who wants to shut us down. When you look at how much money and how much people some of these anti-pet keeping groups have, it's scary. If they gave away all the money to the pet industry could close down, having earned enough money for the rest of their lives. But we have to keep on fighting. I think we are fighting the good cause. Most people love to have a relationship to animals, and the only reason the antis are getting support for what they are proposing is that they are extremely good at picking the low-hanging fruit and going after that where the majority of people don't have an understanding of the effects a ban or restrictions will have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you often see that there'll be an issue that's most people, like animal welfare, for instance. There was a big push here in Australia with puppy farming, and they show all these videos and photos of animals being kept in just squalid conditions, and it's something that no one, any normal person wouldn't want to see. But the thing is, the animal rights groups pushing the agenda, they use that, and people think, oh yeah, there's new laws coming in to stop this this type of puppy farming. But it actually, there's all this legislation behind it that basically puts all the good commercial breeders out of business as well. So it is important that there's a lot of information that the devil's in the detail, I guess, in the legislation, that there might be a specific reason why it's good to have some of these regulations, but it just goes too far and becomes impractical for the industry. And the Indian regulations a couple of years ago are a great example. It just made there was a whole set of welfare guidelines came in, set standards for densities of fish, and it just become impractical to even hold it as as a hobbyist. I think it was one neon tetra in 1,000 litres, Sven, or something stupid.
I don't think
crazy.
It was that bad, but
not quite that bad, but yeah.
I think it was around 200 litres for a neon tetra. So it's bad enough. And it's so obvious that the regulations have not been made to improve animal welfare. They have been made simply to make it impossible to keep animals.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
And what is unfortunate by people who don't see the whole picture is that they believe that there are simple solutions to get behind all these regulations. In the marine trade, I frequently still hear that people say that, well, that's why we should start breeding everything. I am all for breeding if it gives better fish, but don't believe for a single moment that it will stop people attacking the hobby or the trade, because when there is no more wild caught, they will have to find a new target, and the next target is captive breeding. And we already see very clear examples of that for many groups of pets, that it doesn't matter how you source the animals, they want us to stop having animals. No matter what arguments. If the one argument fails, move on to the next one.
Well, that would be what's going on in Winnipeg, where you can have 3 different species of snakes, and that's it. And even the most ubiquitous captive bred snake, the ball python, isn't on their approved list.
Yep. And you can probably guarantee that in a few years' time that they'll be chasing after those 3 species as well.
But one of the things we have to do is to educate in each sector, whether it's aquatic, avian, reptile, whatever. Then when you see a proposal like 2 that are just filed here in the US last couple of weeks are attacking wild mammals and birds, that's only phase 1. Aquatics will be in the next group. So we have to keep alerting people. Don't just sit back. Help support other people and keep people informed. It's amazing how many people sort of just poo-poo it and don't even think to read these things. One of the incredible things in this one petition is that in the US, an importer would waive, or an exporter, all rights to protect their confidential business information. It would be published every quarter. You'd be publishing your sources, who you're buying from, what you're paying for the fish, all of this. People we have to scare the hell out of people in the animal world. And I don't know how we're going to do it, to be honest with you.
Yeah. Marshall or Shane or Svein, I think a lot of our listeners are in the United States right now, and they might be wondering what they can do, or who amongst our trade in the United States, at least, who can be the ones that take a proactive step, whether through their own doing or a donation of any sort. How can they help?
Well, for the US situation in particular, I don't think I'm the best person to answer exactly what people can do, except for the general advice that anyone who is in the trade making money one way or another, be it on live animals or on foods, on accessories or what have you, need to support trade associations that actively work with lobbying these issues.
Yeah.
As for hobbyists, they should also realize that the hobby is dependent on a healthy, sustainable trade. And therefore, I think it's great that you have organizations like MASNA who actually work focused on informing people and also on responding on issues. And it's a dream of me that hobbyist associations or federations at least, and trade associations should speak a lot more together than what they traditionally do, as we do share the common interest of keeping animals in captivity. The whole expression keeping animals in captivity has a unfortunate ring to it. It's not politically correct anymore to keep anything in captivity, but still, let's agree that this is something we want, and we want to do it as good as possible, as sustainable as possible, taking animal welfare into account, taking nature conservation into account, but forgetting about animal rights, as animal rights and keeping of animals are two terms that do not function together. You can't believe in animal rights and still think that keeping an animal for whatever purpose is possible. I know there are lots of people who are provoked by my view on this, but I've read almost all the major works from the animal rights philosophers of the world who have coined the whole idea of animal rights. Peter Singer, Tom Reagan, Gary Francione, and quite a few others. And if you read what they write, there is no chance that we can continue to keep animals if we believe in animal rights.
Sven, there are two points I'd like to make. Number one, with respect to the hobby groups, we do not have really good lists in the US of all of them. When we had an issue in Michigan, fortunately, we found a local hobbyist who went out of his way to pull it together. Some of this in the US, a lot of the hobbyist groups in individual states can be very, very active. And in Michigan, it proved to be very effective. We've got to figure out, how do we compile and keep current lists of those organizations? How do we interface with them? Because that is, I think, going to be critical on being able to get enough people at the local level to really become active and to also provide data that we need from time to time, especially on first breedings, things like that. And maybe that's something that IPAC should consider in the various countries, is that the organizations start making sure they have compiled good lists of hobby groups within their communities.
I know that's a challenge for me. You know, we have the self-reporting clubs that interface with myself and my board members constantly. And then we have some that, well, Matt's local club is a dictatorship and it's run really well. But the ones that have new board members every single year, their life changes, and so then we lose contact with them. But yeah, I think you're right, Marshall. It's a challenge to make sure everyone. And then to Svein's earlier point. Yeah, Shane and I live on the same continent, right? But I don't know if we've ever met in person. We spoke a couple of years ago on the phone.
Yeah.
So many of us could come together, you know, whether it's at InterZoo or other shows as we start opening up the planet again here in the near future. So.
Yes, I can only dream about that.
Yeah,
I think
my local,
this is the longest I've ever.
No, go ahead, Shane.
No, I was just going to say this is probably the longest I've been in one country for in 20 years. So. Yeah, it's just crazy.
I was just going to interject here that, you know, the local club that Kevin referred to, at this point, we haven't had an in-person meeting in Oh, geez, nearly 2 years. We're basically dead in the water because of the pandemic. So that's another problem that clubs and these organizations are facing is not every one of them has made it through the pandemic unscathed. We lost our meeting place. The people we worked with have moved on to other jobs. So I have no idea what our club will look like coming out of this. So
I think that's true the
Kevin,
world over. Sorry, go ahead.
I wanted, we had a private side note. I don't know if you would want to include this, but just about the role of MASNA and lobbying and the firewall that's there. I don't know if you wanted to talk about that at all, just because Marshall can kind of speak to this best in this group, where I don't feel like we have the lobbying organization other than PJAC at the moment.
Yeah, people are often coming to myself, I'll release some information for Hawaii, for example, through our Hawaii Band Fact Check Network. And as a 501c3 in the United States, we can go as far as to inform the general public of the science that's being conducted, the science that the state biologists say. We can link to all the resources. We can say, this is what the best minds from the state government or independently are saying. And then I can link to those resources and I can say, here's everything available. As a 501c3, we can't lobby. And so I can't go to the point of saying, you should call your representative and say this. And so in the United States, we have PJAC, and there are state entities, and there are other independent entities in the reptile space. But for the marine space, really, it's the Aquarium, I forget the acronym, Marshall, do you know the acronym?
The
Aquarium Defense Fund?
Association of Marine Parks and Aquariums.
Is there an ADF, Aquarium Defense Fund for PJAC?
Not that they have a committee, yes.
Yeah, the Aquatic Defense Fund is part of PJAC, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it's active, and they get a lot of funding from some of the key players, mainly importers. I am preparing right now a rather somewhat sarcastic at times alert about these 2 petitions recently filed in the US, which I will circulate to everybody on here, because this is an example of where they are citing scientific journals for supporting a bunch of their statements. And between that and the other thing that's happening in this country, I did a separate PowerPoint presentation on how the animal rights people have taken over the curriculum in law schools. And they're in all the different courses in law schools now, wills and estates. How do you take care of your animals on your death? It's unbelievable what they're doing. People are interested. I'll circulate to the group just to give you an idea of, I think, some of the real future battles we have to deal with. And these 2 petitions recently filed are the scariest that we've had in this country in years. And it was done by the Center for Biological Diversity and the Natural Resources Defense Council. And they cite scientific, 100 and some scientific articles are cited. And as you know, you can take those out of context very easily.
And I think, again, going back to this animal rights philosophy, it's very important to point out that in particular, and any trade association I know of wouldn't go against scientific evidence of problems with the collection or the welfare or whatever with pets and ornamental fishes. Animal rights, however, do not always believe in science, as this is a philosophy close to a religion, where they will handpick whatever argument they can find against the use of animals. If you go to conservation organizations like WWF, IUCN, Traffic, what have you, you will nowadays very rarely find people who are convinced that collection of ornamental fishes from nature is a problem. There could be local problems in it, but as a whole, active conservation organizations are looking to the positive effects of ornamental fish harvest from nature in terms of creating incentives for conservation, in bettering socioeconomic conditions in rural areas, etc., etc. Animal rights organizations, on the other hand, will never accept that there are any positive effects. An organization like Fondation Franz Weber, based in Switzerland, has on their agenda and very clearly outspoken to end the ornamental fish trade. They are looking at all arguments they can find to make the ornamental fish trade look bad. And we can't improve in any way except stopping to keep fishes that would satisfy them. So there's a huge difference between scientific evidence on sustainability issues and the belief that no pets and fish should be kept.
Yeah. And I think another thing going on from that, Sven, we've talked about the fact that, when we go to argue at places like, CITES and, even within governments now, a lot of industry people say, well, just tell them the science, tell them the facts. Well, that's not necessarily enough, because it becomes down to a political, ideological discussion, and the science sort of doesn't always get the prominence that it should in those sort of discussions, and it's very hard to argue people that just don't accept anything that you say. So it's important that we have the capacity to lobby and inform the decision makers, but unfortunately, some of it becomes a political decision rather than a science-based decision. And certainly, from an OFI perspective, and it'd be the same with the other trade organisations, as Sven said, we have no problem if there's scientific evidence to say that we need to change something. That that's what we want to do. We need to have a sustainable industry, but sometimes, the science is forgotten about, which is it's a major hurdle, and it continue to become more of a problem, I would think.
So Svein and Shane, would you give everyone in the audience just a bit of background on OFI so they understand what it is that OFI is and what it really oversees, since that's really your active role at the moment?
I might leave that to you, Sven. You've got the
You want to give it
history.
to me? I was glad to give it to you. Okay.
Hey, this is your show, Sven, so over to you.
Oh, yeah. Well, I haven't actually prepared to remember all the details, but
I'll help.
Ornamental Fish International was created, I think, in the 1980s by a group of concerned traders in live ornamental fish, who already then were starting to see that the ornamental fish trade was an easy target for those who wanted to create problems for the trade. And the obvious solution was to become proactive. And proactive, not least on sustainability issues, improving animal welfare, improving transport, improving the way we talked about the trade and the way the trade conducted their business. This was people from all over the world, but I think there was a higher number of Europeans and North Americans who were involved. They started first to meet around the world in different places. That was before you really had much of international trade shows, except for Interzoo in Germany. So they did, of course, meet in Germany, in Nuremberg, but they also met in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Hong Kong, in Florida, all over the world. At some stage, they realized that this was an undertaking too big to be run by professional traders only, and they employed a secretary general. They had a couple of secretary generals who didn't last long, whether that was because they felt they couldn't cope with the problems, or that they were paid too little, or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't a member at that time. But when John Dawes became Secretary General, it started to change focus. It moved more and more away from the feeling of a social club into an active lobbyist organization. When I became president, I continued this development until John Dawes resigned as Secretary General and we had to look for a new one. I hired Alex Plug from the Netherlands, who became a very famous person in the trade. Unfortunately, lost his life in the plane crash over Ukraine some years ago. But he and I together succeeded in transforming OFI towards what it is today. And I'm happy to see that Shane is continuing this work very well. We are now more active than ever on several continents. And that's where I think you should take over, Shane.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, we still are a European-based organisation, but I think our membership, I think only about 40% of our membership is from Europe. So we've got members all over the world, you know, from the African continent, obviously across Asia Pacific, North America, South America. So, you know, we try and, well, obviously we lobby on behalf of the industry. We do a lot of work in the EU, obviously, like we're an EU registered organisation, so we have a lobbyist that works for us within the EU Parliament. So we do put a lot of resources into that, but you know, and that's often been a criticism that, you know, we do a lot sort of focus on Europe, but there's a lot of legislation that's driven from the European Parliament that will affect, you know, any of the exporters across the Asia Pacific that send fish into Europe, and unfortunately we tend to see that where there's legislation introduced that affects the industry in one jurisdiction, it tends to flow onto other countries. So yeah, it's good to be active in that area. You know, we obviously work a lot in the CITES realm, which is Sven does that for us, so very active with that. So one of the things we're dealing with at the moment is the CITES Marine Ornamental Workshop, which has been delayed because of COVID. We were expecting that would have occurred last year, and you know, while we actually hope as you know, amongst the industry organisations we're working with, that you know, this provides us an opportunity to sort of have a clear pathway and develop some, I suppose, some guidelines as to where the industry is going to go over the next few years. Yeah, and if it's based on science and, you know, like a good discussion between the various government organisations and industry, it could actually be really good. But unfortunately, there is an agenda behind that that's driving it, being driven by animal rights groups, which, you know, they want to see the industry closed down. So that's where the politics comes into it, which is a bit of an issue. But yeah, we're trying more and more to work with other organisations around the world. You know, we are an international group, but we have quite limited resources. So we try to work with the local industry associations and support them in any way we can, you know, to deal with different things. So, for example, with your situation in Winnipeg, you know, we've offered Susan and, you know, Project Canada support. We won't be actively involved there, but we'll help in any way we can in the background. So, you know, we're trying to, you know, especially through the work that Sven's doing with IPAC, for example, we're trying to sort of coordinate what we're doing with other trade organisations around the world a lot more. So it's interesting times. It has been a shame. Like, COVID has impacted our industry in a number of ways, both positive and negative. Unfortunately, we've seen probably a dozen or so members drop off over the last couple of years because of COVID, not being able to trade at all. You know, especially members from countries in Africa and Central America, and that they virtually had no capacity to export fish. So I think some of those have actually, you know, lost their businesses, and we've had a couple people then in the membership have had personal tragedy through COVID. We had one of our members passed away last week. So it's impacted us. So our resources, our membership has dropped off a bit, which has affected our capacity to do a lot of things. But hopefully we keep going and we try to do our best with what we've got. And Sven's very important to that. So as I said before, please don't go anywhere, Sven.
I know our viewers would be familiar with two of your board members, at least, Dr. Tim Miller-Morgan, who was a MACNA 2018 speaker, and Sandy Moore of Seagrass Farms.
But I think I would add that OFI, being the only international specific ornamental fish trade organization which is active, should have had a lot more members than it has. And considering that, I'm sure there will be people in the trade listening in on this discussion also. I can't say it any stronger than please join OFI if you believe that something needs to be done to secure the future of the trade. And I think I can say, Shane, without giving away any secrets, that OFI is looking at ways for also getting individuals involved with OFI as supporters. So in some time, concerned hobbyists and smaller retailers may also get involved with OFI work one way or another.
Well, that answered one of my questions, Svein, and I wanted you to speak just a little bit about CITES and your work with CITES, given that I think a lot of the hobbyists who might be watching this may not be really familiar with the impact that CITES has on the aquarium industry and the aquarium trade and the aquarium hobby. I mean, every marine aquarium hobbyist is subject to rules from CITES that dictate what's in their aquariums effectively. So could you give just a little bit of background on your work there?
Yeah. Well, CITES has been around now for quite some years. I think they are more than 40 years old now. Right. And currently there are 183 countries across the world. That is, most of the countries recognized by the United Nations are members of CITES and have to follow CITES regulations in all international trade in animals and plants that are listed on CITES. There are currently not an awful lot of ornamental fish and other ornamental aquatic organisms on CITES, with a couple of exceptions. But that is partly because of trade associations like OFI having been actively involved for so many years. But everyone in a marine hobby should realize that all stony corals are on CITES and regulated under fairly strict measures on how trade can be conducted internationally. You have, for instance, to make non-detriment findings to prove that the trade in no way harms natural populations of the species in question. And for many countries, and also for CITES in general, if they don't trust these non-detriment findings, they can suspend the trade from those countries. The EU has suspended trade in a lot of coral species from Indonesia over the years. Somewhat peculiar because the other main market for the corals from Indonesia, the US, never suspended the trade. So the only effect they had was that the Indonesians had to sell the coral cheaper to get the same quantity out to the market. So there was no reduction in how many corals were harvested because of the EU ban. It was only the prices and the income that dropped. But going back to my involvement with CITES, it started when I was asked by the president who preceded me, Mick Seaby from the UK, who asked me when I was vice president of OFI the first time whether I would take on representing OFI in CITES. And I went to a meeting in, I think it was the year 2000 in Nairobi, Kenya. As quite a novice, I didn't have a clue on what was going on. Going to a CITES meeting for the first time is quite a shocking experience, as you believe when you come that this is about science and logic and reasoning, and you end up in this anthill of politics, emotions, dirty tricks, what have you. But having been involved for 21 years already, I'm becoming one of the veterans in CITES. There are not many people around who have been to more CITES meetings than myself. The only one is sitting here together with us, Marshall, who is probably the one person in the world who have attended most CITES meetings. I don't think there are anyone that I know who have been near beating you on that, Marshall.
The only reason I want to go to the next CITES meeting, I will then set the record and beat out Rick Parsons, but he wrote the treaty. That's why he's ahead of me, right? We're tied. But I've been to every CITES meeting starting in 1979. So I've given away my age. I'm 21.
And
I'd like to stress, Sven, you have been a major contributor to dealing not just for fish, but on helping out in a lot of different areas because of the network of people that you've had to work with within the European community. And that's been critical, I believe, in the pet trade. I'm talking here beyond just OFI, in the pet trades having a greater influence behind the scenes in CITES than would have otherwise been achieved. And you're really responsible for that.
Yep.
Thank you. It's a response I'm happy to take, but I want to follow you up by saying that your guidance in CITES was extremely important in the first years, and it continues to be both valuable and important for me to collaborate with you. So please continue to go on CITES meeting as well. You don't have to carry my bags anymore necessarily. Also, as a follow-up on what you say about my contacts, I think that no one can achieve anything in this highly political environment without having contacts. And that has been what has been most important for me in all the years. I feel at times that someone are giving me credit for something that others have been doing, but if I should accept credit myself for what I've done, it is by involving so many people that my work has become easier. And that's the only way we can win this game.
Yep.
If viewers want to get involved on a more than a national level, on an international level, you mentioned Ornamental Fish International, OFI earlier. You can go to ofish.org to learn more about OFI.
Actually, just one of the points I'd like to make, leading on about the CITES issue, that a lot of people who I think in the hobby may have a bit of a misunderstanding about what the impacts are, because I often hear, and even within trade, that if CITES bans has more controls on fish, for example, once a species listed, that it's okay because we're breeding that and it's we can still get it because it's bred. It actually doesn't. It actually regulates any international trade in that species. So, for example, if clownfish were made, were listed on CITES, not only wild caught fish but also farmed fish would actually be impacted. So it's not going to affect trade within, say, the US, for example. But if someone was breeding clownfish in, say, Thailand, there's a very big farm there that produces clownfish, their exports would be regulated by CITES, so they would no longer be able to export to the US or Europe without CITES permits. And it can actually take quite a long time. Like, it's not just a matter of, you've been breeding these fish for 5 years or 10 years or whatever. You will automatically get your CITES quotas and permit permission to export, it could take years and years. And Sven's done some or interesting analysis of the grey parrot industry out of Africa, where as soon as the CITES regulations come in, there was quite a good breeding program going on. I think it was South Africa, wasn't it, Sven?
Yes, it was.
And as soon as the regulations come in, the exports of the regulated bred parrots basically dropped off to zero because they couldn't get the CITES export quotas. So, defending any of these species at CITES is very important because it has potential to affect not only the wild caught but also the farm fish as well. So it is important to consider that.
Yeah, and it creates a lot of extra work for the breeders in documenting what they are doing and how they have been doing it. And I can't imagine the mess we would face with something like clone fishes with all the hybrids that are made today, as you have to prove what you are trading in. And some people tend to believe that CITES is something that automatically rescues the species. It's almost to the extent that people think that if you get the dinosaurs on CITES, they will come back. But unfortunately, very often, CITES has proven to be detrimental to the survival of the species. Shane mentioned the African grey parrot, where there was a thriving export business from South Africa of captive bred specimens, 112,000 exported in a year. It was uplisted to Appendix 1 of CITES, and the trade export from South Africa went the next year down to, I think it was 6,000 specimens. At the same time, the wild harvest illegal in the range countries in West Africa exploded. The prices quadrupled because of this listing, and there wasn't enough captive bred around. So the black market across the world wanted to pay for smuggled birds from the wild. So it has achieved absolutely nothing. I know that the hard believers in CITES will argue that, we will just wait and see. We will see how beneficial it is. But I don't believe that. Seahorses was listed in 2003 after a somewhat peculiar debate in Santiago de Chile, and before that in Nairobi, and Marshall was very involved as I was. And from the trade, we argued the whole time that the only likely effect of a listing would be that the valuable, low volume, high value trade in live specimens for aquaria would disappear, while the rest of the threats for seahorse populations worldwide would not be affected whatsoever. And what we have seen is that since 2003, there has been I think around 89% decline in the trade in seahorses for aquaria. And that is both captive bred and wild caught. It was in 2018 down to 24,000 specimens in total for aquarium keeping of all seahorses. At the same time, Project Seahorse, who were the organization fighting for the listing, has expressed that it's likely that more than 70 million specimens of seahorses are caught every year as bycatch in trawling for other species. So they have reduced the live trade of high value to 24,000 specimens and done nothing with the 70 million specimens. What is that in terms of success?
Sven, one thing I think also that we have to start monitoring, two areas. Number one, this is probably very important for the marine trade. In the US, a number of individual states have enacted laws regulating or banning the trade in a CITES listed species. So we have to start also educating the trade about that. A second area, which is becoming problematic, and sooner or later we've got to find somebody to replace me, but is with the International Air Transport Association. We have airlines now who are refusing to accept shipments because they are involving a CITES listed species. Or in one case just recently, they do not believe that the US government's export documents are legal and therefore will not carry the fish from the Marshall Islands to the United States. So we've got to do an awful lot of work with the airline industry. And we're going to have to start revisiting some of the container notes on shipping animals. Now, OFI has published, I guess, a second edition on live animal transport. I hope at some point that OFI can have those publications as ebooks or something and update some of them, because you all have a fabulous library that were published over the years. I don't know how up to date they are, but I've relied on your one on live animal shipping with a couple of airlines. And we as a community have got to start working with the airlines. Fortunately, we've been able to stall them on revisiting the container notes for shipping aquatic organisms. But this is a critical role that OFI can play in the future. Really, we're going to need it. And that's another little job for Sven to do.
I leave a bit for Shane as well.
I'm sure you can take on more. Yeah, look, it is something we're working on, Marshall, in terms of the books. We're actually revamping our website at the moment. And as part of that, we'll have ebooks, all our educational series as ebooks on there. And as Sven said, we're actually working on a few things. So we'll be able to sell our OFI journal on a subscription basis electronically. So yeah, there's a few things we're working on. So over the next 2 or 3 months, we hope to have a lot of that out, so we can actually a bit more outreach and engage more people around the world.
Great.
Yeah, I don't know. It just suddenly struck me the idea that OFI journal, which of course I've seen, if that was actively marketed to all aquarium societies around the world so that they have a subscription, and then members could then have access to that through the society, that, it's sort of a soft push, just an idea. Yeah.
Well, certainly, like John Dawes, who we've sort of mentioned before, he's currently editing that. It's a really it's a great magazine.
Yes.
It looks really good. Like our designer Monique, she does a great job as well. So yeah, I think it would be, a lot of people would be interested in it. So yeah, certainly we're trying to get that out to more people. So stay tuned over the next 2 or 3 months.
Great.
There we go. Sven's got one of the. Yeah, so over the next 2 or 3 months, we'll make that more widely available for people around the world.
Good. Great.
So congratulations again.
See that? Well done there.
I just wanted to mention, yes, MACNA 2022 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, from September 9th to the 11th. Both you, Alf Jakob and Svein, you're both invited. So I hope you guys can join us right on the Great Lakes there. Congratulations to you both, and congratulations. I want to thank Matt. I think Matt is still here. You might see his name on the recording here, but thank you so much to Matt and the MASNA Award and Aquarius for the Year Committee for helping select Spain this year.